All right, gamers, so the Tier 4 Selector is real for the 10-year anniversary, and by the time you're watching this video, you will already be able to get it in-game just by logging in. 10 million gold, uniform ticket, and a brand new, never-before for free Tier 4 Selector with the following characters available from Iron Man to Miss Sharon Rogers. So what we're going to be doing today, of course, is ranking them so you can make the most informed decision possible about which character you want to choose from the Tier 4 Selector. Now, this is a really big decision. This is basically the same as going back in time to when the original Tier 3 Selectors were being given out and making a decision. So this is really going to impact your account. I don't want to overstate the value of it, but I also don't want to understate the value of it. It's quite serious. So of course, we're only going to be ranking these characters at Tier 4 because it's a Tier 4 Selector. So their performance at Tier 3, their performance at 80 does not matter. I am also going to be comparing Sharon Rogers with two different uniforms. The most recent seasonal uniform that you see on the right there, and then the other one before it that you see on the left. The reason for that is now that she has her best uniform as a seasonal, she doesn't have, she isn't accessible for as many players. However, if you really are insistent, if you see the ranking and you're really insistent that you really want a Tier 4 Sharon Rogers, there is a way. Now, it does cost real money. I will put this out there. It does cost real money, so it's not available for free-to-plays in any way, shape, or form. But there is a brand new 10-year seasonal uniform pack, and you can buy a seasonal uniform ticket for $30 US. You get some other stuff here, but mainly you're paying for a seasonal uniform ticket. And you can use that, even though we're out of season, to buy that Sharon uniform. Now, I'm not saying you should go and buy it. I'm not trying to, encourage you to. I'm just pointing that out. And that also goes for the seasonal Black Bolt uniform, which otherwise is unavailable, and also goes for the seasonal Storm uniform that is otherwise unavailable. And the thing is, if you don't have those uniforms, Storm and Black Bolt are essentially at the bottom of the list for Tier 4s. Now, will they get new uniforms in the future? They probably will. But for the time being, we have to assume that you're going to be getting these uniforms because otherwise they're in the bin. And it sort of follows for Sharon as well that she's going to struggle without her newest uniform, which is unfortunately seasonal. So I wanted to tackle the seasonals. I wanted to sort of get that out of the way before we go ahead and rank everybody, starting with the lowest contenders. So starting off with probably the worst character you can choose from the Tier 4 Selector, Moon Knight. And the reason for that is not only is this a 3-year-old uniform, so it's from 2022, it's one of the first Tier 4s, so it hasn't really aged well in terms of balancing, but also we've gotten so many strong combat types, right? If Moon Knight had been a universal, or if this was a different character and it had been like a universal villain, we have very few universal villain Tier 4s, particularly for things like ABX, ABL, and PvE. But unfortunately, combat is just flooded with very, very good characters. There are actually 3-4 really good options that are waiting to be ranked later on in this video. And so because of that, Moon Knight kind of brings up the rear. But honestly, not far behind him, AntMan. You could really flip-flop these. It doesn't matter. My personal bias, I'm going to put AntMan a little bit ahead, as well as the uniform being a little bit newer. It's from 2023, which is still old, but it's almost a year newer than Moon Knight. But still just really bad. Not good for PvP anymore, despite the 80% guaranteed dodge, which is unfortunate. They didn't give him any PvP weapons either, which is unfortunate. And then they didn't even make him very strong for PvE. We know that Miles Morales eats his lunch, and then we've gotten a bunch of speed heroes since then as well. Hawkeye, Bullseye, etc. He's not a hero, but you get what I'm saying. That have basically just eclipsed him in value, several times over. So yeah, it doesn't really do enough in PvE and doesn't have any real force in PvP to be relevant. The last one I would put at this bottom tier is Shadow Shell. She is a step above Moon Knight and Ant-Man. I would say this, even though she was actually released before Ant-Man, after Moon Knight. And the reason for that is she has synergy with the Warriors of the Sky, and Blue Dragon really carries that roster a lot. And then, of course, Sunbird with the Revive. So you do need a lot of pieces to make it work, but if you do put those pieces together, you can see limited success in PvP game modes, and I wouldn't be surprised if the Warriors of the Sky made a comeback for this new 5-team lineup for the new game mode, the new PvP game mode. I can't remember the name now, when most of the other incumbent metas are banned. Because of that, I would say that she's decent as a tier 4 option, but decent we can go all the way up to like must-have, and that's basically how this ranking is going to continue. Continuing on in the ranking, though, we do have to talk about one of the elephants in the room, which is Black Widow. She just got a uniform, and she had the uniform from Golden Gate replaced in 2022, which would have matched Moon Knight's, you know, she would have been down here without it. But essentially, she's still just kind of a striker. She has some limited options in PvP when you can pair her with other symbiotes, but she's essentially just a worse version of Spider-Man. So wherever I put Spider-Man on this list, Black Widow's going to have to be behind him. And so you sort of have to keep that in mind. If you're going to tier 4 Black Widow, you should just ask yourself, shouldn't I just choose Spider-Man unless you already have him tier 4? But the other problem is he basically just does almost everything that she does as well or better. So that's another sort of issue where she's just not making enough of a name for herself, making enough room for herself. And with Yelena potentially coming to eat her lunch again, she's almost, you know, she's almost here. The only thing that's really holding her back from being at the bottom tier is the fact that she's still a very good tier 4 striker. She hits really hard, she has a proc on her skill, but the old Golden Gate uniform actually performs better in that role than the newer uniform. So I can see some value in Black Widow if you have a lot of these other characters, but you're just sort of trying to shore up some things. You know, I think Black Widow, like Cap, like some of these other characters, is in that camp of popularity where they're always going to get a new uniform. I don't think we're going to go more than 2 years without seeing a replacement for this one, particularly because it's a symbiote uniform, and that doesn't fit the stereotypical archetype of Black Widow. It is one of the looks she's had, but when you think Black Widow, you don't think symbiote. So I don't think Marvel's going to want this Black Widow advertised in Marvel Future Fight for like 3-4 years straight. They're going to want a quick replacement for this, maybe a year, maybe 2 years, but probably no more than that. That being said, I would place these two sort of firmly together, kind of glued at the hip, and unfortunately they're basically just doing the same things together. Now, moving along, we have Dr. Octopus, who was released around the time of Ant-Man, a little bit later, and I think he's good, but he also suffers from the same thing as Moon Knight, where there's just too many combat types to compete with him that provide similar or better value in some cases. And although he is pretty good in things outside of ABX ABL, he does struggle a little bit, and he is a little bit more difficult to play than other characters. Now, some people might argue, well, he's not so much more difficult that you have to really dock points for it. But if we're going to cover all of our bases, yeah, he doesn't have any PvP value. And then for the PvE side of things, he does take a lot more practice than other characters, and you have to understand his kit because it is very unique. Now, his kit being unique, his tier 4 being unique, refreshing, literally refreshing his skill cooldowns, that could be a bonus. You could say, hey, that actually makes him better, and that's up to personal preference. But I'm trying to rank this for all players, and so rather than ranking it for uniqueness and bumping it up, I do have to sort of dock him a little bit for difficulty and rank him down a little bit. It was easier to ignore the difficulty when he was the de facto Giga Goat, but now with Kingpin, now with Winter Soldier, now with all these other options available, it's muddied the water. And if you're not going for absolute tippy-top scores, in which case you'd already have him tier 4, he's really not presenting a lot of options, and there may not be a future for him to get new uniforms for the time being, right? He's not a marquee character like Black Widow, and then, you know, although it's a pretty weird look for him, there would have to be a dedicated comic update to revive him that may never come, or may take years to come. Hulk, on the other hand, I see as just a better pick than Dr. Octopus. And the reason for that is he's really, really easy to play, and he has more flexibility. He also scores well in ABX ABL. He may not necessarily go to the tippy top the way that Dr. Octopus can, but Hulk has the flexibility of being easier to play and having some PvP value. Now, I don't want to overstate his PvP value and say that it's like so good. They did downgrade him substantially from his old Fear Itself Hulk tier 4, which was PvP centric. But they made up for that by making him very, very easy to play in PvE and much stronger for PvE. I still think that they're both a step behind some of these other characters for specifically World Boss Legend content, and we'll take a look at that in a little bit more depth once we've got an initial ranking set out, but I still think he's pretty good. But that sort of brings us to our last PvE combat type here, which is Venom. And Venom is an interesting case because while he lags behind Hulk and Dr. Octopus in ABX ABL scores, I believe he makes up for it with just absolutely tremendous value for World Boss Legend, and then GBR, and then now Zombie Survival. He just blows up the content. He ramps so hard. I would say he's fun to play in a way that's not quite as frustrating as, or can be quite as frustrating as Dr. Octopus, because you get to spam his tier 3 skill, and who doesn't love symbiote dinosaurs? I do have a bias here, so I could absolutely see people ranking it more like this, or even ranking it like this and bringing Dr. Octopus up. I could totally see that, but I'm just saying for my own personal preference, my own personal bias, I would probably rank it somewhere here. But you're free to disagree with me and think differently, but that is just my take on it. I see Venom as almost like a jack of all trades kind of character, where he's not necessarily the absolute tippy top, but he's going to do a ton of different content really well, and he is the best of these 4, including Cap coming up really soon. He's the best of these 4 combat types, not including Moon Knight, obviously, for World Boss Legend. I'm not including Moon Knight, not because he's better than Venom, but because he's substantially worse. Finally, with Captain America, it's a bit of a tricky one. I'm actually going to be tier 4ing him myself. But for Cap, you do need the newest uniform. You do need Zombie Cap. It's a big jump over the one before it, the Veterans Day uniform, or Back to Basics, I think. But his ranking definitely depends on what you want out of him and what you can give him in terms of supports, particularly Weapon Hex's seasonal support uniform, that Zombie Weapon Hex. With the Zombie Weapon Hex uniform, I would argue that Cap is here. He is, in a lot of ways, like Venom, a jack of all trades, where he can do a ton of content for you. And unlike Venom, Hulk, and Dr. Octopus, he actually has real, legitimate PvP value. So for PvP players, they might even rank it like this. But that depends on having Weapon Hex. If you don't have Seasonal Weapon Hex, in my opinion, Captain America drops down to, I would say, about here. And then again, it depends on whether you value PvP. If you do value PvP and his flexibility there, then I would say this is a fair ranking. If you don't value PvP, then I would argue that he's probably going to drop down to here. While he's still a pretty decent option for PvE, and he's fun to play, and he's easier to play now more than ever, he's just really not going to bring you enough value compared to other types like Hulk and Venom, and he's still going to require a lot of investment that you may or may not have. Me, however, I do tend to like Captain America. I'm a little bit of a Captain America homer. I'm a little bit torn between putting him here and putting him here. I do overvalue PvP. I'm fully aware of that, so I'm just trying to give you guys lots of different scenarios and sort of see how these rankings can fluctuate. But I think putting him here is a fair assessment of what he brings and what he will be bringing to my roster. So that does it for the speed and combat types. Now we just have the blast and universals left. The issue with Black Bolt is that it's a seasonal uniform. And very plainly, if you don't have the seasonal uniform for Black Bolt, and if you're not planning to get it, he is like F tier. He's like way back here. He's awful, absolutely awful. His last uniform before that was from like 2020. It's just you're going back in time through a time machine. The other problem is this was the first Halloween seasonal. So it's coming up on, it's 2.5 years old now, and it's going to be 3 years old in 2025 October. So it's very old. And so I kind of have to put him in this like bottom tier here, mainly because although he is, I would say he's better. Like he still hits pretty hard for PvE, doesn't have much PvP value, and it's a really old uniform. So you're kind of in danger of it losing its value or being replaced very quickly. Now, that's a weird thing to say because it's a tier 4 selector. It doesn't buy the uniform. So in terms of buying him with future value, I think you could put him like here. I think based on his potential future value, because he's the king of Inhumans, so any Inhuman update we're going to get, and we know there has to be one eventually in the pipeline for Medusa, means that he will be featured. They're not going to do an Inhumans update without Black Bolt. Let's just get that out of the way. It's definitely not happening. But when is that happening? We don't know. So I kind of have to be honest with myself and say he probably goes here. Some people will still think this is too high and say he deserves to go here. That's fair. I understand that, but I would still, for his future value potentially, I would give him a little bit more, of a bonus, and I would put him here. But yeah, this is, I think, firmly where he stands. And then for Thor, I think Thor is amazing. I think there are a lot of Thor glazers out there, and I am one of them. And I think that also creates a lot of Thor haters who see him as overvalued and overhyped and not that good. Certainly doesn't have PvP value in this day and age, so I don't want to, I'm not going to say that. And then for his PvE value, is he overshadowed by stronger alien male heroes for ABX ABL? Absolutely. Does Gladiator completely eat his lunch for alien male hero? He absolutely does. But this tier list unfortunately doesn't include or feature Gladiator. And what Thor sort of lacks or doesn't do enough of in ABX ABL to push his scores so far beyond, he makes up for it by being insane value for World Boss Legend, good value for Zombie Survival, great value for GBR, and he's also one of the top 3 strikers along with the old Black Widow and Ghost Rider. And he can actually be basically as good as Ghost Rider as a striker for the Order class characters if you don't have a better build on Ghost Rider. So being able to put Thor in the same conversation PvE-wise as Ghost Rider, I think speaks volumes. And the fact that he has the leadership tag and he has access to all these crazy buffs, White Fox, Yondu, etc., Valkyrie, means that he, has a ton of value. He has a potential self-buffing lead when you combo that with his artifact. I think some people would say it's probably more like here, but then you could also argue that we just have to move everyone up, and then it becomes an issue of just like if we really need 4 tiers at all for this thing. But I do think he is a step above, mainly because he's universal, and mainly because he basically is just like a better version of Venom in my mind. He's going to score a little bit better in the game modes where scoring matters, and then he's going to push even harder in the PvE game modes like World Boss Legend. Coming now to Iron Man, as a blast type male hero and the only one on this list, it's tough. It's tough. Iron Man had a really good tier 4 and it's aged really well, but unfortunately it's his uniform at this point with that 30%, the 200% damage increase when they're under 30% HP that's carrying him. And outside of essentially World Boss Legend and GBR, he's not really carrying his weight. He's not used for zombie survival. He's not really used for other game modes. He doesn't have any PvP value. So unfortunately, I think Iron Man kind of just has to sit here. It was a little bit of an incremental upgrade for him with the nil armor, so I don't think it went nearly as far as some of these other uniforms did. But yeah, I think I can't really rank Iron Man higher unless you're like a World Boss. If you're looking for just like a World Boss merchant, then I would say he probably goes to here, but even this I think is a bit exaggerated. Unfortunately, you kind of have to put him here. Next, we have Storm, and unlike Black Bolt, if you don't have her seasonal uniform, she's actually not down here. As a tier 4, I would still put her here if you don't have the seasonal uniform because she still has a support ability. Now, it's not as strong as her seasonal support ability, but it does still mean that on this list, she's the only support tier 4 available. That is a big deal. Now, with the older uniforms like X-Men versus Inhumans and stuff like that, Storm's ability only gives you 35% increased elemental damage for allies, but that's still very good. It's not quite as good as the seasonal Storm, which gives 55% increased elemental damage and I believe 30 or 35% ignore dodge, but it's still something. So I would say if you do not have seasonal Storm, I would say she probably ends up here as a support. And then I would say if you do have the seasonal Storm, she could move up as high as here or even here if you really value the support ability. I don't want to overstate the value of support characters, but it also depends. Like, your mileage may vary. Really, it matters more to your account than it does to my subjective opinion, So if you don't have the Storm uniform, I would the newest seasonal one, I would say she probably goes here. But again, even if you don't have the seasonal uniform, if you really need a support tier 4 and you can just get one for free from this update, that's like, she could go right here. But again, it depends on what you need, but she can go as high as here because she supports all allies with elemental damage. So it's a huge buff. It's not just mutants, it's not just heroes, it's everybody. So she can buff a ton of different characters as long as they're dealing elemental damage. It's very, very good. But that involves needing her for game modes where you can only use tier 4s. So right now, the only game mode that applies that restriction is World Boss Legend Plus. So if you're not going to be climbing anytime soon, the new Corvus Proxima, the new Ebony Black Dwarf, or Black Swan, then yeah, Storm probably goes down here. But if you are, shit, she could go up here. So I think a fair ranking for her is probably somewhere around here. I would probably go here. I have a little bit of a soft spot for Storm. And then finally, we come to the awkward paywall Sharon Rogers. With the newest uniform, Sharon is easier to play, and she absolutely blows up world bosses, but like Iron Man, she's mostly just a World Boss Legend merchant. She does have some value for zombie survival, so that is to be taken into consideration, but I think for a seasonal uniform, I think the best value you're going to get is somewhere around here in this area. So I still think this is a bit of a disappointment for some players, mainly because, she's not going to do anything for ABX ABL the way that Hulk does, and she's not going to do anything for PvP the way that Cap does. So this kind of is her best case scenario. I think best case scenario, You can put her like high B tier. She really is just very strong at tier 380 already, so you're not getting a tremendous buff from that to jump to tier 4. And then that sort of leaves the non-seasonal Sharon. If you're not going to do seasonal Sharon, I think you're talking about something like this. It's a bit of an outdated uniform by now. It's almost 2 years old, and so you have a bit of a situation where it's just sort of been, it's literally been replaced, and that's kind of the best case scenario. So I probably wouldn't consider tier 4ing her in that case. You might even argue that she goes there because there's no PvP value, whereas Shadow Shell does have PvP value. So this is kind of my initial reaction or how I would do it, but I could certainly see a world where you rank them instead like this, and I think that's a fair assessment. I think it's a fair assessment to do something like this and just basically delete this category, because really you don't have like it's hard to make a bad choice from this tier 4 selector. I think really the only truly bad choice from the tier 4 selector would be Black Bolt with no seasonal uniform. I genuinely think that's the only one that's bad, or again any other character tier 4 and then no uniform, right? All of their base looks are terrible by today's standards, but that's obviously breaking the most basic rules of Marvel Future Fight character building, and it wouldn't really make sense. So this has been a very detailed breakdown of what I perceive to be the best and worst tier 4 characters for the tier 4 selector. I understand that it's a super important decision, so if you need more advice, if you want to consult the orb, feel free to hit us up down below in the comments on YouTube, on Twitter, hit us up on Discord. There's tons of people more knowledgeable than me there on Discord. They can help you out, they can give you advice. They have all of these characters tier 4. Heck, I don't even have them all tier 4 yet. So yeah, thank you so much for watching the video. Hopefully it's been helpful to you. Smash the like button if you enjoyed the content, and I will see you in the next one. Take care.